the London bombings, which I know had a profound experience for you, where would you want to start? I mean, I'm minded, how did the day start? Let's start with the day starting, as it did. So feel free to just share a little bit.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. So this was obviously back in 2005, isn't it? 2005. I used to be an accountant, but I'm all right now. Just thought so I was working for a company in Covent Garden, which many of you may know, quite famous. And it was my normal, I was just having a normal, I'd have been 4 years born again Christian at that time, so I was still a bit of a baby in the Lord, just getting to pray for about up to an hour before I left home in the morning. At that time I was a single mother of a lovely son who's a mature adult now. But at that time I think he was just started secondary school, so he was just taking himself to school just then. And so I had a lovely prayer with the Lord, and it was a normal morning to me. And so I proceeded I used to take the tube, London Underground. For some of you, I know you're in Peterborough, so we don't have underground here. I went on the, as normal, just got on the first train I normally have to change. So we got to King's Cross, and then I saw lots of crowds. And as I normally come up the escalators, my normal routine every day would be to get on the platform from the escalators straight into the train that way. So I would normally, without fail, be in the first carriage. For some reason that morning, on the 7th of July, there was a guard I'd never seen a guard before. As I approached to get him, he pulled the gate in front of me and looked at me and nodded his head and went like that. And I went, oh no, now you're going to make me late. That was in my head. So I ran round the other side, and I had to get on the next entrance, which was, I thought at the time was the third carriage, but I've since done my retrack, and I can see it was the end of the second carriage. So there was no tannoy, or what do you call it, notice up, because that was distorted. So I thought I'd better get on this train, because if I don't I'll be late. So I squeezed, I haven't seen the platform packed like that ever, but I managed to squeeze myself in the train, and then the door closed, and then we were off as normal. And we were sort of halfway in the tunnel before we got to the next station, which I think was Russell Square, and that's when the explosion happened. And so what happened is, all I can describe it is, it was something like out of a James Bond movie, because I couldn't comprehend, my brain couldn't comprehend an explosion, and I saw the door of the carriage literally blow up, and there was a ball of fire and thick smoke that was gushing towards me. Now in that instant I knew in my head I was dead. That's what I thought. So I hung on, and then this was taking place within seconds, and I said, into your life, Lord, I commit my spirit. And I closed my eyes, because everything went black, and the train came to a grinding halt. And then when I actually opened my eyes, I was actually surprised, A, I was alive, and 2, still standing. And I couldn't see anything because it was jet black in the carriage. And then all of a sudden, everyone was silent, and then all of a sudden I heard screams coming from the first carriage. And people were banging on the windows, doors, or whatever, but I just heard loud bangs, screams, and it was the most horrific and shaky experience that I've ever been in to date. And I was trying to think, what's happened? We've crashed. And in my mind I thought, okay, I'm never going to get on London transport again, and all these things are just the natural things that probably go through someone's mind. and I just wanted to get out really. And then some people were crying around me, and then all of a sudden I took over, my Christianity cap came back on, and I went, oh, I must console these people and tell them it's all going to be okay. Jesus is here. I don't know how I got to do that in this chaos. But somehow I knew that God was going to get us out. And then I heard the tannoy, and the driver was trying to communicate with us, but then it went dead. And so people panicked, there was lots of commotion. And eventually, just try and cut a long story short, because it felt like we were there forever. But I would say probably within 45 minutes we saw lights, and then torches flashing with a voice saying, we're going to get you out, but you're going to have to walk backwards. And I thought, phew, here's the rescue. So we did actually have to go through the rest of the carriages backwards. And they actually got us down. There were people helping us to get down on the tracks itself, so we were walking on the live tracks, but they had to turn it off, obviously. So I found myself walking, and then there were paramedics, ambulance running past me. We were all in a single line, and they were bringing people who were from the first carriage, literally stretchers. It was all horrific, blood everywhere. It was just horrific. And I kept thinking to myself, well, what about the driver? Is he okay? And I don't know how people found it to take photographs, but people were taking photographs. And they lifted me up back to King's Cross, by the way, so I didn't get anywhere really, bit of a wander in the wilderness, and got up on the platform. They said, make your way up. We made our way up. They gave us bottles of water. I was covered in soot from head to toe, and we went up on the escalators, and it was just amazing to see just daylight. I thought, I didn't actually think I was going to see daylight again. And then there was helicopters and chaos, ambulances, fire engines, and all I remember is that they shouted, those who can walk, make your way to the nearest hospital. And I thought, well, that's me, so I better start walking. So I started walking to the nearest hospital. And on the journey, there was a man who I didn't know, I didn't recognise anybody, but he stopped and started walking with me. Now, he said, I recognise you from my carriage. I said, oh, okay. So it turned out he was a Muslim man, and although he didn't practice his faith, and for some reason I just got out the picture of my son, and I said, I thank God that I had a wonderful time with him this morning, and if anything had happened to me today, I would be with him. And he looked, and I showed him my son, and I said, I'm now, God has given me the grace to still see my son. And then he took a picture of his daughter, beautiful girl, and said, I'm so glad that I can see my daughter. And now you said what you said, maybe I should investigate about faith. So I invited him to our church. And then we were continuing walking. Now, at this time, all this time, I thought, well, it's a crash still. I was oblivious of what happened. And then the police officer saw us and said, are you guys all right? Were you on the bus? And I looked at him and thought, come on, we've just come out of the train. What's he talking about, the bus, And then he said, well, that bus 30 that blew up. And at that point, I broke down. I went, oh my goodness. And I just cried, and I was hysterical. And they sat me down on the wall and trying to console me. I'm sorry, I thought you knew, he said. And I said, no, what's happening to London? And I was just hysterical. And then he towed us, and So I need to get to my son's school. I needed to, make sure he doesn't get on the train, and that it was that. So I'm trying to cut out a long story. So I eventually walked to. I made a couple of calls. I got to the. I wanted to get to. I got to my son's school. Well, I got to the hospital actually. Sorry, I can't miss that bit. I collapsed in the nurse's arms. They wheelchaired me to the hospital, and I only got treated for lack of oxygen and shock. And during that time, the nurse said, I think I was there for about an hour, speaking to quite a few people on the phone, my brother, etc. My friend's husband came to pick me up in the car. But during that time, the nurse said, when you're ready, you can leave, but you need to go to the reception. And I prayed at that time to God, and I said, Lord, Father, I don't know why you kept me alive with not even a single scratch on my body, but I know I should have been in the first carriage. But for now on, I choose to live for you, my life for you. And so I got dressed and went downstairs. Now, it was like a reception area like this, packed with people who were coming from different directions from the disaster that I later learned that various bombs took place that morning. And the scariest thing was that I was in the reception. Detectives had to take our number because you just don't know. We could have been the bomber, the suicide bomber, and they had to take photographs. I remember having the number and photograph taken, and this man was talking to me. He had a sling, he had bandage around his head, and basically wounds all over from the shrapnel. And he was talking to me 100 miles per hour because they had given him gas. And cut a long story short, he said that there was this woman who was standing up with her suitcase, and he was sitting down. And he said the people who stood up cushioned the blow from the people who were sitting down. And then he said that she was on the floor with her eyes open and she was dead. And I said, please don't tell me anymore. And when my friend's husband came to pick me up, I was just wanted to focus and get into my son's school, which I did, to explain what happened, and the head teacher listened, etc., and not to take my son, make sure my son doesn't go on the train or bus. But I got home, had a shower, and I had this long reflection to think, I needed to hear what he said, because I realised, because in hindsight, people said they think that guard was an angel that stopped me from getting on the train because it wasn't my time. And so I realised that God was in the midst of that chaos. Now, how am I here? Well, I've survived because I did have post-traumatic stress disorder for 2.5 weeks, and I tell you why. It could have been up until now if it wasn't for Jesus. And I'm going to cut a long story short, because there's lots that happened. Victim support came, detectives came to my home. I was interviewed I had to go for counselling for a counsellor who treats war victims and things like that. But none of those helped. None of them helped to cure me. But I went to a conference. I couldn't walk on the main street, by the way. I could only travel to my doctor's by walking through the back streets, through a path. I couldn't face the main roads. I couldn't go back in the train. And they offered me medication. I didn't want to take it, but I went to a conference. I was able to drive because I was in control of the car, with some people who were in my life group, cell group at the time. And it was a conference where the preacher spoke about the cross and what Jesus did over 2,000 years ago, and that was to take all our diseases out and bring healing as well as salvation. And at that point, I was with my son as well. We both jumped up and received our healing, and it was from there I was able to go back on the train again and realise that it was the enemy that was trying to keep me from fulfilling the call of God on my life by keeping me bound up in fear. And so that's the story in a nutshell. So it's Jesus that's actually healed me. And just to brush it up, a few years later, God showed me through Psalm 91, verse 16, where it says, with long life have I satisfied him and shown him my salvation. And what he showed me through that scripture is that I just say to God, well, forever, if anything happened to me, I would have been with him. Keeping me here, I'm for him. So I'm in him, all the time. And I felt that he was saying to me through that scripture, with long life, I mean, I choose to live for him and in him forever. And when I go to be with him, I am in him and with him forever. So whatever happens, whatever is going to happen in these end times that we're living in, we're always going to be with him. He's never going to leave us nor forsake us. So,
Wow.
Follow that then.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.